Fund Supermart, your online gateway to unit trusts.
Hi Devan.
Hello.
What is the outlook for emerging markets in 2015?
I think the outlook for emerging markets is probably better this year than it was last year. One of the first things that we need to remember is that last year actually emerging markets were one of the best performing asset classes. They certainly performed better than the European markets, than the UK or indeed Japan. And the big issue for last year was just the strength of the dollar and the strength of the US market. And in 2015, while there are some concerns about the dollar, I think for emerging markets, what you have is opportunity. And the opportunity is centered around the fact that a lower oil price means that for a lot of emerging markets, inflation should come down, the fiscal position for many countries should improve, and as a result of all of that, you should see interest rates coming down in many emerging markets, which should help stimulate growth and hopefully drive these markets higher. So from our perspective, we're relatively upbeat about emerging markets this year.
Which are some of the countries or sectors within the emerging markets that are likely to outperform or underperform?
At a simple level, you could argue that the countries which are big importers of oil will be the biggest beneficiaries of the fall in the oil price this year. And certainly, if you look at the markets so far this year have reflected that. So countries which are beneficiaries of the falling oil price have done better. That said, you have seen quite a marked fall in the price of companies and markets which are not beneficiaries of a fallen oil price. So there is value in places such as Russia. So that's certainly an interesting place to be looking at, although that comes with lots of risks. But for us, as bottom-up stock pickers, where we find the greatest opportunities are in places such as Southeast Asia, such as Turkey, and indeed, if you're brave enough, perhaps you would look at both Russia and indeed Brazil.
Is it a good time to invest in emerging markets equities now, amidst the stronger US dollar?
I think the consensus trade for a lot of people is that they want to buy a stronger dollar. And certainly for the last couple of years, we've seen the US market do tremendously well. And partly that's been driven by the strength of the dollar and the strength of the US economy. I think if you're looking at valuations, a lot of that must be in the price. And 2015 looks slightly more complicated than the last few years. And what I mean by that is that if you look at emerging markets, you have economies which perhaps are bottoming, potentially coming into a period of doing relatively better. You have profitability in a lot of emerging market companies, which has again bottomed and perhaps is going to get better. And certainly you have valuations which look a lot cheaper than you do in many of these developed markets, in particular the US. So we would say the opportunities are actually plenty in emerging markets.
What advice do you have for investors when it comes to selecting a suitable emerging market strategy for their portfolio? Why should investors invest in the Aberdeen Emerging Markets Fund?
I think one of the things about emerging markets that people sometimes forget is that these are relatively illiquid asset classes. And the reason why I mention that is that as a result of being relatively illiquid, you have greater volatility perhaps than you see in developed markets. And the mistake that people make very often is that volatility equals risk. That's not necessarily the case. When you see the volatility in share prices in emerging markets, that more often than not reflects the fact that they're just less liquid. It doesn't actually tell you anything about the fundamentals of the country or indeed the companies that you're looking at. So from our perspective, the key thing that people need to remember is that they need to be brave and think about the longer term. And the longer term for emerging markets has to be better than you would say for many developed markets. You have robust economies, you have longer term beneficiaries of structural changes such as demographics. You have economies which are actually in much better shape and health than their developed market counterparts. So we would say take a longer term view, don't worry too much about the noise in the short term, and remember that you are investing in emerging markets which are some of the most dynamic places in the world today. Now, why you would invest with Aberdeen to access emerging markets is that we've been doing this a long time. So we understand the volatility, we understand the importance of focusing on companies, we understand the importance of making sure that the companies that you invest in are the companies that are going to look after you as shareholders and make you good returns in the long term. And that is absolutely crucial to invest.